without any further delay, I'll turn it over to Vicki Reed for this awesome training.
And Vicki Ritchie has her hand up, and I didn't know if she had something to say or she just has her hand up. Oh, she did.
I will put
Maybe
my
she's
hand back down.
oh, okay.
It was up there.
If you were asking about CEUs or something, I wanted you to have a chance. Well, hello, good night, good evening, everybody. And it's kind of funny because this training was set up. I had lunch with Melinda back in like July. And these two different trainings I've done were set up when I had absolutely no clue that I would be the commissioner. And I see that Laura Karam is one of the folks here, so she could have given this to you. And don't think you can hide back there. I see you even without your camera on, because she knows as much or more about this than I ever would. There she is. I actually saw her earlier today in one of those jillions of Zooms I did. So feel free to jump in and correct me if I say something wrong. But since this is sort of a Juvenile Justice 101, I'm calling it. Hopefully after being this in a number of years, I won't say anything too wrong. And I'm just kind of give you an overview, and there's not so many of us on here. I've got, the old PowerPoint and all that good stuff, but that we can't make it informal, and feel free just to ask any questions that you have. I'm just thinking that some of you who deal with teenagers, or you're starting with 11-year-olds, and if you're going to hang with them for a long time, they'll be teenagers, that this might be useful information for you. And I am just talking about with status and public and youthful offenders, which I'll go into. So this is not about, juvenile justice in the big sense of dependency. And I'm presuming that you all have lots of different trainings on court processes with that. So this is just the going to be the older kids thing. So let me see if I can do this share screen here. Oh, yay. I think I did it. Are we good? I don't see anybody.
I don't see it yet.
Okay, that's weird. It's all I see is it and nothing else. Hang on. Let's try this again. Share screen. Huh. I'm hitting share screen and then the PowerPoint, which should work. What am I doing wrong? That's weird. This may be a very short training. I don't know why it's not coming up. Oh, wait a minute. Here, maybe I got it. Oh, there we go. I just click around enough things. That's what I do with the remote when it doesn't work. I just bang on it till something comes up on the TV. All right, are we good now? Let's see if I can go back there and do this so we don't have to look at all the little. There we go.
Perfect.
I think we're good. All right. So how many of you all were at my last training? Was there a bunch of you, or speak up because I can only see a few of you?
I was.
Okay. So a few of you may have seen this. I put this on there before, so I won't spend too much time on it. But the reason I always usually start my trainings out with this is that always there's this thought out there that juvenile crime is out of sight. It doesn't matter when you ask, people always think that. I think this goes back to the days of Socrates. And 20 years from now, I can probably ask. But the interesting thing is that right now, juvenile crime in the nation, and I think maybe in the world, is probably the lowest it has ever been in recorded history. And people are always very surprised by that because, with the media and so forth. And of course, there has been a blip with COVID of gun violence and some concerns about that, especially here in Lexington, with kids and being charged with some serious things. But that is a very, very small number. And so it is really gone down amazingly. When I first worked for juvenile justice in the late 90s, it was out of sight. We had every facility full. We had this big, huge waiting list. It was just like, the court dockets went on for hours, and it has just really, really shrank. And I mentioned this in our last one, so repetitive for those of you who heard it, but it's worth saying again, that nobody knows exactly the reason. The best things that I buy that people have talked about is the reduction of lead, taking it out of gasoline and paint. Because you think of all that exhaust in downtown urban areas with all that lead-based stuff and those kids breathing it. And when they would do blood tests, the kids' levels were out of sight. And if you have lead, it makes you much more likely to have learning disabilities, to be aggressive, to have behavioral issues. So that is one theory. And I think that one has some perhaps, validation, because like I said, it's not like we can say, well, it's just a prevention program we're doing, because if you did that, then it would be uneven. Some states would be doing better, but it's pretty much universal. And then the other reason was this cell phones, because now when I was a kid, you had, I'm kind of old. So when you had, 6 boys on a Saturday night, they'd all pile in the car and maybe go look for some mischief. Well, now they're all sitting there texting each other, and kids don't get bored. There's no more boredom hardly. They're well, we'll get a video game out or whatever. So that's another proposed. Like I said, nobody has a study. Nobody knows for sure, but I think those are two interesting theories. So we are talking about, and I'm glad for that, a big reduction. So basically, it kind of boils down to 3 different types of kids that we see. One are public offenders, and these are kids that if you or I committed this offense, it would be an offense. So if you burglarize a home, you steal a car, you do any of those, same thing with a kid, they would be charged with the same offense. The other are youthful offenders, which sounds like the same thing as juvenile offenders, but it's actually in Kentucky, a different classification. And these are kids that get tried in adult court. So there are certain offenses that in certain ages in which the youth can be tried as an adult, and it goes to circuit court instead of juvenile court, which is in district and in status. I'll talk about in a minute, in family court. So, you have that thing. Now, it used to be, and that we had mandatory waiver. I'll talk about that in the slide here in a minute too, which was certain offenses had to be tried as adult. But thankfully, I believe that was revoked just this last General Assembly. And maybe Laura can tell me. I wasn't sure if it went in effect then or in July or when it did, but now we have gone back to discretionary waiver, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. One very important thing here in Kentucky is, although the youth who's tried in adult court can get the same penalties as an adult offender, 15 years, life, 5 years, whatever it might be, probation, but they are housed in Kentucky separately from the get-go. So if a kid is arrested at 16 for a robbery and is tried as an adult, he will be in juvenile detention. If he goes on is committed or sentenced before 16 to the X number of years, as long as he's under 18, he'll still be housed in a juvenile commitment facility. And then at the age of 18 and 18 and a half, and so it gets into lots of little dicey things you don't need to know, but basically he goes back to the sentencing court. And then they have the choice of, they can send them back to DJJ to be there a little bit longer. They can probate them, release them, or they can send them on to the Department of Corrections. So in a case of a kid who had a very, very serious offense, who's going to serve, say, like 20 years, he might at 16, then he's in juvenile till 18, and then he goes on to, Eddyville, LaGrange, one of those facilities. And we'll talk a little bit more about that here in a minute. So we are, good that I think that we've gone back, that we only do that, in pretty serious circumstances. So the other is status offenders. And these are kids that you or I cannot commit this offense. This is something that is done by your age. So the basic ones are beyond control of parent, run away from home, and truancy. And used to be that, the juvenile justice and child welfare were within the same agency with Cabinet for Families and Children, which you all deal with all the time on the dependency ends of things. But in 1996, that was split off, but the status offenders, which I was happy to see, stayed with the Cabinet for Families and Children. So everybody got that? Any questions about that before I go on? Is that clear as mud? And if you have questions, you'll have to speak up or let Ben know, because I can only see like 4 of you on the side. One of them's Ben, so.
Feel free, anyone, to unmute if you have a question, or post it in the chat, and I'll monitor the chat and let Vicki know if questions show up.
Yeah, that's good with the chat. That'd be too. I can stop, and if you have it, put it in the chat, and I can just stop, or Ben can wave at me and I'll shut up, and I'd be happy to do that. So a little bit about DJJ. We were born with the passage of House Bill 117 back in 1996. And I actually went to the department in early of 1998. I didn't go in the first wave. They actually divided up, decided which staff would stay with the cabinet, which would go to DJJ. And for some unknown reason, they didn't think of the training branch, which is what I was in. So only later did they think, hey, we need training in juvenile stuff too, but they had to do their own. Basically, they kind of forgot about the training branch. But I ended up not going in for training, but a couple of years after it was thing, I was asked to come over and I did. So that's how I ended up with them, which it was where I stayed until I retired in 2004. And so I was retired for 16 years before I came back. So I failed retirement is what I like to say. So, but I've been happy to be back there. So anyway, DJJ, we're supposed to have this nice array of cost-effective services for at-risk youth. We're supposed to prevent delinquency. That was actually put in statute. We are responsible for the care when they're in the facilities and the care after and probation. And we kind of, do it all. And we have been nationally recognized. It's not that sometimes we're not without our problems, but I'm on this group now. It's called the Correctional Juvenile Justice Administrators. It's all 50 states. You only can be with this group if you're the head of the agency. So it's kind of interesting to get on there now. We have a southern region I'm on, and then we do the whole 50 states other times. And I'm always amazed. We truly are ahead of most states in what we're doing. They are, there's some areas maybe they do something better, but overall we are pretty progressive. And one of the reasons was back in, I think it was 1971, when the governor went to does anybody ever hear of Kentucky Village? Is anybody my age? Do you remember Kentucky Village? It's where Blackburn Prison is now. And it was out there. And when you were a kid, that was always the big threat. We're going to send you to KV. And my first boss was Donna Coffey. She and her husband had worked out there. And she was the head of the probation unit when I went to work here for the city. And she told me just some complete horror stories about the place. But basically, if you were mentally retarded, if you were an orphaned, if you were murdered, it didn't, whatever, you all went to KV, and it was just a big mess. So the governor went through there and was pretty horrified by what he saw. And he said no more. And they developed these little small treatment things. And some of those are still in effect. Woods Bend in West Liberty is one of those. And I actually was there 2 days ago, which is so funny. And one of the gentlemen working there has been like 29 years. He's been there since just about the get-go. That's one of our older facilities. But so we are very progressive. And then we have these little small facilities, and it enables us to do things that in these big 300, 400, 500, even bigger state-run facilities that they can't do. So I'm pretty proud of what we do. And we do it all. And again, this is very different. Each state's different. Some states like Michigan does not have any real centralized. It's all county. Ann Arbor does one thing, Detroit does another. It's all done by the county. It's just, really justice by geography for sure up there. I like the fact that we're centralized. The only bad thing about being centralized, if we're bad, everything is bad. If you have it separated out, then you might have, well, this part's good and whatever. But so this way we need to be good because we're doing it all. We're doing the probation in the community. We're doing aftercare, which I'm proud we don't call it parole. A lot of places and states do. They use those adult terminology, and we try to stay away from that. So we call it aftercare status. We have regional juvenile detention centers instead of county operated jails for adults or for kids like a lot of states do. And then for out-of-home placements, we have everything. We can use everything from foster care, private child care, like the Methodist home, if you're familiar with that sort of a place. We have group homes. And then we have we used to call them camps. They're our youth development centers, and they're our residential facilities. And we have a DARE, and that's the only secure facility that we have. The other ones are what we call non-hardware secure, staff secure. Only a DARE is, and it was built in the early 2000s, shortly after the department was born. It was right after some of the school shootings that had happened. And when they were first expecting, we're going to get this huge wave of all these kids are going to be tried as adults, we'd be filling that place up. Well, it didn't happen. Instead, like I said, crime went down, but we're by statute, a DARE has to be the same as a medium security adult facility. So it does have cells, an outside fenced area with the fence that, I forget what it's not razor wire, but it's that kind where it curves in. I forget there's a name for that. I should learn that now that I'm in this job. So, we do have those facilities available. So then I'm going to fast forward a little bit here. So that was, in 1996 when House Bill 117 formed DJJ. And then the next big reform came in 2000. All right, Laura, I just went blank. Is it 1415? Do you know?
It went into effect July 1st of 2015.
See, I told you. It's like I was going to call her. Okay, 2015. So some of the people here are blocking my words, so maybe it was on there. And basically, one of the reasons that they did a reform, even though we were ahead of a lot of states on the things that we do, is that we had some bad figures. We are the 4th highest for status offenders. And for a while, we got to be number 1. Yay! not something to be proud of. I think now we might be back up to 2. I think we may have come back up. The most recent information I saw, we still are not good in this area. In most states now, or a lot of states, you're not allowed to put a status offender in detention. And I think it should be that way. You have a kid who's truant, you do not lock them up with rapists and murderers. You have a kid who runs away, they go to emergency shelter, they do not go into a jail cell. Unfortunately, Kentucky has not been progressive in this one area. We've improved a whole lot, but we still to this day have status offenders. And seriously, I'll go and look at a place and there is a 14-year-old who skipped school, and on their left is a kid in there for murder, on their right is a kid for rape, and a kid whatever. It's just a really horrendous situation. A lot of people think, oh, well, they separate them out. We do not. We do not have the space. Our facilities are small. We don't have the ability to separate them out. We don't even separate girls out. Girls are in the same pods with boys. They have their own cell, but we do not have, unless we have a high number, a separation there. So, and just so people do know, juvenile detention is a jail for kids. So that, sometimes people say things to me like, I was at one of the city parks and they were saying, oh, they found out our juvenile detention was on Spur Road. So we should go over there to Masterson and have the kids ride the horses. I'm like, our kids don't leave. They go out for court and maybe a medical appointment. And other than that, they are locked up in there and they're not going anywhere. So just to know, it is a secure thing, and it's nothing that you want to take lightly. And the other thing was, they were spending for kids who were committed as status offenders, the very high amount of money on placements for those kids that were placed at the Methodist home or Barnabas home, or there's a whole list of private childcare. A whole lot of money. So, one of this was driven by dollars, but I think it was also driven by looking at what is better for kids. So here's what Senate Bill 200 did. It increased the access to diversion, which I'll talk about here in a minute too. And that's trying to just keep kids completely out of the front door of the juvenile justice system entirely. And it limited the use of out-of-home placements for youth. It increased our use of evidence-based programs. And I'm presuming, Ben, do they have much of evidence-based programs as far as like for dependency kids and so forth? And that's something they're going to for preventing out-of-home placements? Have you all had much information on that?
I am not the best person to answer that question, but I do know that Families First is keeping a lot more kids in their homes of origin before they're removed.
Yes, and I think the Family First dollars do specify that states need to use evidence-based program like multisystemic therapy, I think is one, and family functional therapy, and therapeutic foster care for kids who do go into placement, but at least it keeps them out of the higher levels. So I do know that they're looking at that. Increase the use of assessment and risk-making tools, and the purpose is also to reduce and to track recidivism rates. And I will say that it took a long time to get the recidivism rate. Senate Bill 200 said, the department should keep that. And it was a long time coming. Laura probably knows too. We do actually have that information now. It was not easy to get because you've got adult correction system and you've got AOC and you've got hours, and all these computers are on different things and they don't talk well and play nice as kids together. So it was hard to get that. So basically what we had to do was we had our community service workers who, you know, have the kids on their caseload, whether they're in the community or place, and followed them and went to the AOC and CourtNet and all this thing and handed all of them to find out. So it's a point of time right now. It's nothing we can just churn out every day, but the one that we did, and this was current just as a couple of months ago, our recidivism rate was 45%. Now, what do y'all think about that? Do you think that's good or bad? That means a little less than half of the kids go on to commit another offense. A lot of people probably are thinking, well, that's not too good. And actually it's really high, or really, it's actually good. When you look at most national, it's 80, 85, 90% recidivism rate when it comes to that. Now, this doesn't mean that necessarily that they go on to some higher level, but it just means you might have somebody who committed a burglary and later they pick up a public intoxication when they're 18 at a college party. So technically they would be a failure, but you know, hey, they're in college and they're making good grades, and I'd call that a success. So recidivism doesn't always even tell you the whole picture, but it actually, that number is surprisingly pretty good. So we're kind of happy about that. And as far as limiting the use of out-of-home placements, let me touch on that just a minute too. When I was around for ages, when a kid got committed, it was till age 18. Didn't matter how old they were. If they were 11, age 18, 17, and age 18. And so you had kids get in the system who they might have come in on a low level offense, but it took them forever to get out. We used to say that, and I still hear this nationally, that juvenile justice has it's like a freeway with an on ramp. And then once you get on, there's no off ramp to get off. And we saw kids that happened. They came in on a minor misdemeanor, but their behavior was always such they couldn't complete the program. They'd work their way up from orientation to level 1, and then they get up to graduation phase, and they do something wrong, and they get kicked back down, and they just churned in the system for forever. So now there are some limits on that. If it's a misdemeanor offender, they can't stay out of home more than 4 months. And that includes maybe the first in detention time while they're waiting to go to placement. But at 4 months, even if they've done lousy, they generally do go. There's this caveat where we can ask for them to be extended, but it really doesn't happen very often. And then for the bulk of felonies, it would be a year. And only for the very serious offenses and for sex offenders does it remain still that age 18. So that actually helped reduce our numbers tremendously, because, you know, we just had kids, staff felt like they couldn't justify them leaving because they never finished the program. But if you really want a kid who shoplifted a pair of tennis shoes serving 6 years, when an adult would probably pay a fine and go home, and that would be the end of it. I did mention that we have been nationally recognized. We are one of only 8 states that don't have anyone under 18 in an adult jail or prison. And for example, if you're 17, well, if you're 14 in Florida and you get charged with murder, you go to the adult jail. If you're in Texas and you get charged, you go to the adult jail. And I always had a problem with that, because first off, there's been no finding of guilt. So would you want your son or daughter taken off on, first they're being the trauma being if they were falsely accused, and then jailed when they haven't been found guilty of anything? I've never understood that, but that is common in many states, but we don't do that. And here they stay in a juvenile facility. Juvenile offenders by law cannot receive the death penalty or life without parole. And this came, Laura again probably knows the dates on that, but that happened a few years back. I already mentioned our small, treatment-oriented programs and our statewide system of diversion. I'm going to talk about that here in a second too, because you may not know what diversion. Any questions before I know I talk fast. All right, I'll just keep blitzing on. So here, I just thought you'd find this interesting. 31 states and the DC ban or have no one serving life without parole for children. And so we are one of those. But there are some states in which they've got kids that went in at 15. I think I saw one that was released recently. He actually served out his sentence and was released at like 82 or something. So they're trying to do a lot more of second chance. And I'm for that. It's surprising. There's actually some cases out there of some pretty horrendous circumstances where, years later, the kid was released and they're like living, John Citizen. They're married, driving the, soccer bus with 2-point kids. And a lot of times, what you are as a teenager is not necessarily what you are. And I think there's some recognition and, adolescent brain science and all that good stuff. So let me touch on diversion. As far as I know, and I asked the head of our AOC, Rachel Bingham, if she knew this, and she seemed to agree with me. I think we're the only state in the nation that has a statewide system of diversion. And so what diversion is in this case, if the police arrest a kid and they cite him and send him home, or they take him to the court designated worker, processes them or whatever, then they can do things with them instead of sending them to court. They can have them do a work project. They can have them participate in family counseling. They can have them, there's a range of different, one of the evidence-based programs. They get anger aggression replacement training. They can do all sorts of things. And then if the kid successfully completes that, they don't go to court, they don't see the judge, and they stay out of the system, which is a really good thing, because what we have learned is that, like I said, with the ramp, the deeper the kid gets in the system, the more likely they are to stay in the system and become an adult offender. And here's the sad thing. For those of you who read The Car Thief, you may remember this in there. If you've got Johnny and Bobby, and they both get, do an offense and they run off, and the police only catch Bobby and Johnny gets away, Johnny is more likely not to become an offender. Because just any kind of processing is more likely statistically, and I'm not saying we shouldn't, we can't just let them all get away for anything and not arrest, but statistically, the kid that gets away, doesn't end up in the system as much as the others. You get like, maybe Bobby goes and is detained. And while he's there, especially now, it's like some drug dealer says, hey, you live in my neighborhood. Look me up on Facebook when you get out. I got some selling you can do for me. So, there's Johnny, he ran home scared, and Bobby's now, going to be selling drugs in a year. So that's just one of the many different ways that things can happen. And again, in the book, when I wrote that book, I based it on so many things that I had actually seen. And one of those was a true story. It was a wealthy citizen, and every year his pumpkin got smashed. And he just really was irate about his pumpkin being smashed. So he hid in the bushes or, plotted. And sure enough, a kid came along, grabbed the pumpkin, smashed it in the street. He went out and grabbed him, held him, called the police. And the police were like, they didn't want to mess with it. But this guy was, he was a wealthy, got his big mansion there and was insisting that they do something. So they arrested the kid. They fully planned on releasing him to his parents. Well, he was like 16 or 17, played basketball in school, that sort of thing. Parents are away on a trip or something. No parent. So they call the judge. Well, we don't have anybody to release this kid to. And I still remember the judge saying, well, put him in detention, a night or two in there won't hurt him. Well, it did, because by the time he spent the one night in there, and then people found out about that, he's kicked off the basketball team. He meets, kind of drifts over to these kids he met in the detention, and he ended up being an offender. So, again, just that it's better to keep those less serious kids out as much as we can. The other thing they did with the status offenders is, especially, I think they can do public offenders, and I think they are, but they initially started off with status offenders. They have these family accountability intervention and response FAIR team, where they basically have lots of different, like Lexington has, I think at least two, maybe I think they have 2 FAIR teams. And if I'm wrong on that, somebody knows, feel free to let me know that. But basically it's, the school person and a child welfare person and maybe somebody from mental health. And they kind of, have the case, and they look at it and try to, plug the kid into resources and try to make sure that they don't, end up coming into the public offender era. So I mentioned juvenile detention centers. And like I said, I want you to understand that these are not kitty camps. You see this picture here. I mean, they're cells. They have a toilet and a bench. And unlike adult centers, they don't have windows. I always find that so funny. If you go to most jails, there's this little 4-inch slit that goes down like this that, you know, you can actually look out of, and no juvenile detention centers hardly have windows. And I think I don't even know why. I keep wanting to find somebody that'll tell me, but my guess is they think, well, it's confidential. We can't have somebody look in and see a kid. Where an adult, it doesn't matter. There is no confidentiality. But I always think that's horrible. I always think kids should have a window. They have a lot of natural light. They have windows at the top where you can't see out, frost and stuff. But like in our detention center here in Lexington, at no point anywhere in the building can you see out a window. You can see inside the building, and there's a courtyard you can go to where you can look up and see the sky. It's surrounded by 4 walls. But the entire time they're in there, you never see a tree, a car, a blade of grass. And we have kids staying there sometimes 2 and 3 years that never, you know, the only time they see if they're going to court, they you know, they can look out the window on the way to court and actually for the first time see a McDonald's or something in the year and a half. So I just want people to understand that it's not kiddie land, like, you know, and people say, oh, isn't that juvie? I never, ever use that term because it makes it sound like it's something cute and not bad. And I don't feel that way. So I never call it juvie. But we do try, you know, to put, you don't do treatment in detention. That's the other thing. The kids are awaiting court. We do not provide treatment services. And even some judges think we do. I said that to a family court judge not too long ago. And they're like, well, what do you mean? I said, we don't treat kids in detention. I mean, Laura and her folks might come get us if we did that, because one of the parts of treatment is usually to talk about your offense. Well, these kids are in pre-adjudicating status. They're awaiting court action. They're supposed to keep their mouth shut and not talk about their offense, and their attorney would tell them that. But the other side of that is you really don't have the moral thing of treating somebody until they, you know, are you know, found guilty of something. So that's one of the reasons. And the other reason we can't is that it's just too chaotic a place. You know, when the kids get sent to our treatment facilities, they're going to be there. They're going to be with the same, a longer time, the same kids. Kids don't come in and out that often. Well, in juvenile detention, you got some kids come in for 2 hours, they're gone, another for 2 days, some are 2 years, all these different kids. You got an 11-year-old charged with some rinky-dink thing. You got a 17-year-old charged with murder, and there's no ability to group those kids together. You wouldn't do, you can't do treatment where you just sprinkle magic dust and do the same thing with all the kids. So we don't have that. But what we do have is the kids do get a full school day, and we do have counseling in the sense of individual and group, but it's more on dealing with your circumstances. So if you're depressed because you're in detention, you might want to talk to a counselor. If you're worried that your mom's going to OD and you're not going to be there to administer the Narcan to revive her, and you're worried about that, they would talk about that. And they would just talk about the whole dealing with confinement. But it's that sort of counseling, not really, you know, treatment as we think of it. Now, once a kid is committed to DJJ, then we do treatment. And here's where we get into the different places that we can put kids. We have group homes, and they serve a maximum of 8 kids, and we have them scattered throughout the state. The closest one to here might be probably we have Frankfurt Group Home and Frenchburg Group Home that are fairly near here. And they're, like I said, there's some in Western Kentucky and Hopkinsville and scattered around. We generally use those for either our younger, less serious offenders, and also for step downs. So if you have a kid who goes to one of our youth development centers, which I'll talk about here in a minute, and he doesn't have anywhere to go when he leaves, or he still needs some services, but we don't need to keep him in as secure a setting, then he might step down to a group home for a period of time. One of our group homes in Ashland really focuses on the kids who don't have any homes to return to. They're generally sex offenders too, so they have the you know, it's difficult to find placements for them. And they actually, most of the kids will work an outside job while they're there. They're working McDonald's, and we're keeping money in their bank account, and so that when they leave, we can try to help them get an apartment and get set up and have services, so they're more likely to be successful. The kids there either go to school at a local day treatment center, which is where you have school and counseling kind of combined. It's kind of like an alternative school, or they can go to the local public schools. And so we do have, you know, the ability to place kids. It says here their place is geographically close to home as possible, which is somewhat true and somewhat not, because sometimes, you know, it's driven by the type of kid and the need as much as the actual closeness to home. So I might have to change on that one. Any questions on any of that? I know I'm rattling through this quick. Is anybody surprised by anything?
I was wondering, is sentencing then kind of a ticket to get treatment, or is it possible to get treatment without sentencing occurring?
Well, by sentencing or committing them, yes, they can get treatment, but certainly that should not be the reason, just generally. I mean, that they can get treatment in the community too. They can get everything that they can get in a residential setting, they can get in the community. So the reason they should go to residential is for the safety of the community, that they're committing offenses and safety sometimes of them. But sometimes you see a kid who's just really escalating out of control and committing offenses and involved in this. And so sometimes that sort of intervention's needed, but we don't really want a kid, on some, and they used to do that. They would say, oh, this kid has a lot of treatment needs. And so finally he shoplifted a pair of shoes. Well, let's send him off to DJJ because we haven't been able to get him the mental health treatment he needs. And so we really don't want that. Good question. Any others? Okay. So I'll talk about our youth development centers, and these are small campus type settings. The capacity ranges from 30 to 45, but I'm going to be honest right now, we have far less kids than that, because again, our numbers have really plummeted with the crime rate going down. And in the last few years, several facilities have closed, and that may happen again because of the numbers being small. I think our largest number of kids in one of our facilities right now is 21. So they are quite small, and that has been an extreme blessing with COVID. And people have said, well, why don't you close more of them, because your numbers are small? Well, there's all but to one of them is the maximum is a dorm setup. And the ability to quarantine kids with COVID. I mean, we had to quarantine them when they came in. And, especially when COVID first hit and you didn't have the tests and everything. I mean, we're like trying to keep those kids separate from the kids we already had. And then if you had a kid come down with COVID, they had to be placed in another part of the building. At this center here, this is Moorhead, and this is the main administration building, but there's 2 cottages. And that one cottage they have, their ability, what they did was they had plastic sheeting down the middle of one of those buildings. And so if a kid got COVID, they had their own bathroom and their own room sort of back, not cell, but an actual room that maybe before had 3 or 4 kids in it. And they would quarantine them off from the other kids. So that's one reason that even with the low numbers, we haven't probably closed more facilities, because, it's the safety of staff and the kids. And when we've had staff die from COVID. Fortunately, we have not had any kids. We've had kids get it, but we haven't had anybody, I don't even think hospitalized, and we haven't had any, fortunately, that have passed away from it. But it has been a horrible thing for juvenile justice. COVID has. We had to stop all the volunteer groups and activities that came into our centers. Like I said, I was just at Woods Bend 2 days ago, and they were asking about when can we have volunteers come back? And I'm like, I'm hoping soon. I'm hoping the numbers will allow us to do that, because they actually had some volunteers who came in on Sunday, which was visitation day. And for the kids that didn't have anybody visit them ever, they had this outside community person who would visit them and be their person. And that's so, a lot of kids get very, very upset and angry sometimes, and act out because they don't have a visitor. So that was a very useful thing. Here in Lexington, we had Arts on the Move. If anybody's familiar with that group, has a little band that goes around. And they used to come in spend all day Friday and do arts and crafts with the kids. So all of that got nixed during COVID. So, we've had less programming in the facilities and so forth. And we're, trying to do some things to make things better, while we're hoping to get, the volunteers and folks back in here fairly soon. But the kids, they are like, if they're in the cottage, they will lock the cottage. So the kids are like locked in there, but they also go out on field trips. They go to the bowling alley, they may go swimming someplace. So they're not just locked in all the time, but they do try to, keep any from like just walking away. But like I said, this one is Moorhead, which is one of our, I think, prettier facilities. Sort of looks like Center College or something campus there. And what's nice about Moorhead is we have had several girls who have gone to classes and have, working on their college degrees. We actually have one kid, he's a boy, we call him Doogie Howser. He's 15 and has already graduated from high school and taking several college classes. But he is a youthful offender, so he will be sentenced and may go on as an adult. So it's not like, that's the reason he's still with us taking college classes, because he's not anyone who will be released before age 18. And we do have quite a few kids who do, take college classes. We also have vocational training. They're doing a lot of IT stuff now. They do copper wiring, they do building maintenance. And it's nice because we do a lot of this stuff now with the girls. And again, in the old days, I love it. Back when I was in this, back when I was 20s and 30s, all the girls would have been trained in how to be a receptionist or a nurse or whatever. And the boys would have had the XYZ, good stuff. So it was slow in coming, but now the girls have pretty much a lot of the same opportunities for different things as the boys do. I mentioned the kids tried as adults. Like I said, there's mandatory, discretionary waiver. We've gone back to discretionary, which means that basically the judge is going to look at the kid's circumstances and decide if it warrants that this youth goes on and be tried as an adult. So you wouldn't have, again, that was the point I made in The Car Thief with Kelly, for those of you who read it. And I think I told you all that at that last thing. I actually found a state that had a law, and I thought, this is perfect for my book. And it was that if you are escaped from a secure juvenile facility and commit a felony, it was mandatory that you be tried as an adult. So I was like, bingo. So that was perfect. So you had this kid who really no way should have been tried as an adult, but the law was such that you have to. The hands are tied. Then you work the system a little bit, which we all try to do sometimes, and sometimes have success and not. So for 25 years, we had mandatory waiver. And we've gone back, like I said, just this last year to discretionary waiver. And I'm going to be interested to see how that works out. So like I said, there are offenses where you can be tried as an adult, and probably would be, but they don't have to be. And I already explained, I think, the sentencing court there. And I mentioned this just a little bit too. Probably this happens with you all. We get into this thing about, we call them crossover kids or dual status kids. And these are youth who are involved with both child welfare and juvenile justice. And this is unfortunately very common. And I shared with you all last time, and it's in my book too, that the statistics I've seen is that if a kid who's a child welfare kid has 5 or more placements, they are 80% likely to touch the juvenile justice system at some point. So that's kind of a sad statistic. And you get them both ways. The most common way is we get them in juvenile justice and find out they have a background that either, maybe it was 5 or 10 years ago, they were a substantiated abuse case. Maybe at age 7, they were in foster care for 3 months and went back home. Maybe the commitment was dropped later, or maybe it was just, an investigation, but we find they have some background with child welfare. The other way, though, it can be the opposite, where we have them and there is no child welfare background, but we find out, and we're a mandatory reporter also, if we find out there's abuse and neglect. For instance, if we have a kid in detention and we find out he can't be, when they do the changing of clothes and they see the kid's got bruises all over him, then we might make a report that this kid has been abused, and then child welfare would do an investigation of that. And I will state this is a national problem, so I'm not going to just pick on Kentucky, but a lot of times the child welfare and juvenile justice do not play well together. And you get this thing where we don't fight over getting the kid, we fight over who has to take them. And I have actually seen, and I'm sure maybe Laura has too, some very, very ugly courtroom scenes where right in front of the kid, they're like, you have to take him, you have to take him. They're fighting over who has to take the kid. I love this picture. I found that online. That girl just kind of summed it up. She looks like somebody who might be troubled, and it's probably somebody's daughter. And they put their picture on there, and she's had to suffer with this now ever since. So again, this is a very, very common situation. And in Georgetown, as in DC, the university there, they have the Center for Juvenile Justice Reform, and they're doing a whole crossover youth project. And I was in Indiana about a month or so ago, and they have very specific laws where they are mandated to have joint groups that work with those kids, especially if they're dually committed. to make sure that everybody is sharing information. And we have a problem with that, even just sharing information. Again, we don't necessarily, they have twist, we have Jory, talk to each other and, see what's going on with that. And so we're doing better than we used to. There is actually a committee now that gets together and that one of them can talk to the other and say, we've got this kid and he's involved with you and he was involved with them. So it's something that we're continuing to work on. At least I think we are doing better. Have any of you all had kids who've become juvenile justice kids? Anybody that you're seeing on as your CASA kid? Anybody had that? So, like I said, the best thing, I was going to kind of do a summation here or whatever. What we figured out is, again, we don't want kids into the system. It's best to keep them out as much as we can. And one of the things this is again a national thing, that juvenile probation is doing this complete overhaul, because we found that giving the kids this traditional list of rules and checking them for compliance really is not evidence-based. As a matter of fact, when they do studies, kids turn out either the same or worse than if they'd not had that service. So that's one thing I'm looking at, is that really retooling probation. And we're starting to do that. We're doing some things where we do incentives with kids. We found that carrots work with kids a lot better than the hammer does. And it's amazing what they'll do for a $10 gift card to McDonald's. So we're trying to do some positive youth development and so forth. So we're looking at that. This I found, this is very old, which I think is really funny, because would anybody like to take a guess? Oh, here's the thing, put it in chat. Let's see what we get here. What would you think the cost in Kentucky for a youth to spend 1 day in juvenile detention, the cost per day? Throw it in the chat. Let's see what you got. This is one of those Price is Right, the closest without going over wins a, What do we got, Ben? Let's see some guesses.
250, 800, 1200, 300, 450,
All over the board there, huh?
580, 1,000.
All right, 580, you're closest. It's about $538 a day. Now, it costs more than that for both our youth development centers and our group homes, because like I said, we're doing treatment. We have clinicians in there. There's a lot more, those sorts of things going on. So you run into bigger expenses. But again, think of that, $538 a day for a kid to go to juvenile detention. Just think what you can do with that. If a kid starts, 30 days in there at 538, how much money you could spend doing other things. So that's something we're always considering. Like I said, I'm not sure the year on this, but this is old. It's got, well, it's not too bad. The correctional facility 71.5, I think we're more up to 86 or something like that now. And I have no idea what an adult prison would be. But I wouldn't get those numbers anyway.
Well, that $538 a day, is that, so it's close to $200,000 a year?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah, basically you could send a kid to Harvard. And what I love about that, one of the things that you see a lot of times is they'll lock a kid up for truancy. And so, for $538 a day, I'm like, you know what? I bet you could hire somebody to go sit with that kid in school. The school would still get their per diem. The kid would be in school, and hell, let's pay the kid. I'll give you $100 a day to go to school. I'll save $438. Let's do that. Here, just shell out some money to them. I kid, but it does seem like a poor usage of dollars. And I always say for you advocates out there, and I always want to preface it that, a lot of us out there, I'm one of them, we like to think that we're doing good things for kids. And I have seen wonderful people in child welfare and wonderful people in juvenile justice, but I have also seen people sometimes who are not so wonderful. So you can't, those of you who are doing the advocacy work, you just can't assume that they're operating in the best interest of the child. I have seen it, and this isn't necessarily a completely malicious thing. I mean, I've seen in other places where they'll say, well, we have to do this because you know, it's a lot of money for us. And so we need money to spend on these other kids. If I have to spend all this money on this one kid, then I don't have as much money to spend on these other kids. Or, I mean, they'll come up with some reasons. And like I said, but if you're there for that one kid, then you don't care about those other reasons, right? You're representing what is the best for that one. And this was years ago, but I went off to a conference and there was a guy there from another state who, you know, we were talking about the low numbers, and you're saying, well, you know, I've told our community staff to quit leaving some of these kids at home and go ahead and place them. And I was like, what? He goes, yeah, we got to fill those beds, or, you know, we're going to lose some of those programs. And then what would we be? Those kids, the other kids wouldn't have a program. So they were basically, you know, throwing some kids under the bus to make sure that they had enough beds filled to keep their facilities open. So you just can't assume that we're operating. So you have to keep our toes to the fire sometime. But like I said, I like to think that most of us are out there doing things because we're doing it for the good. So, and I always, like, y'all are my superheroes. You know, our people are paid to do these things, and you all are doing them on your time and dime, I like to call it. So I really admire what you all do, and I'm happy to help you all any way that I can. Okay, I'm trying to exit out of my share here. How do I do that? Let's see, where do I go? I don't want to. Oh, stop share. There we go. Oh, there we go. So that's my dog and pony show, but I'm happy to answer any questions or let you all go on and eat dinner. I'm hungry.
This is Tracy Myers. I don't have a specific question for you, Vicki, and your presentations are always wonderful and an overwhelming amount of information. I guess my question is for Ben. Will we get that PowerPoint that we can
absolutely. If Vicki wants to give it to me,
Yeah, I'll send it to you, Ben. I think this one's small enough that I can email it, I hope.
Great. Thank you, Vicki.
All righty.
Just wanted to thank you for the presentation. It was awesome. I learned a lot of things I had no idea went on. So I really appreciate all your information. It gives me a good place to start looking. Thank you.
Thank you. And by the way, let me just put it out there. We're hiring. So if you have anybody, if you, you know, niece, nephew, somebody or another, we are hiring positions. So, and really, you know, the starting pay for youth workers is certainly not good, and we're working on getting that up. But the one good thing about going to this line of work is in Kentucky, since we are a centralized system, is there is a career ladder. I mean, I started off as a line staff in juvenile detention. That was my very first job. And then fast forward a few years here, and hey, I'm a commissioner. So, you know, there are supervisory levels and so forth. And you know, if people have the people who are drawn to this work are the people who have a passion for helping kids. That should be the reason anyway. So it's kind of we like to have a DJJ family and do stuff. One of the things I have to share, because we were talking about this with some folks earlier. One of the things we're getting ready to hold, which I love, is we have an annual spelling bee. And so all the kids in our facilities now, they study for the spelling bee. So we had the spelling bee, and we did it last year for the first time. And we thought it would be a one-time thing, and that honestly the kids wouldn't be very good at it, and we get through real quick. Well, there was a money prize, and they were up for this, let me tell you. I mean, we were desperate. We ended up doing 3 weeks. We were desperately pawing through medical dictionaries to come up with words. I mean, they were spelling those words. We finally got down to 1 boy and 1 girl, and the one kid never missed a word. And finally, the one, I think it was a girl, finally missed one. So we had our prize winner. But those kids had studied for that. They were up for it. So we're all real excited that to have the spelling bee. But we do a lot of fun things with the kids. Our Lake Cumberland facility, I'm getting ready because now that it's fall, I want to go down there. I went to Woods Bend, that whetted my appetite. It's surrounded by the lake. That the library is on the lower level, and the whole window looks out over the lake. And we have a pontoon boat. The kids go out on the pontoon boat fishing and swimming. So we try to, you know, we try to get a lot of regular activities so the kids get to be kids. And I always say I'm never as surprised by what the kids have done to get to our facilities as what they haven't done. I think kids here in Lexington, you won't believe how many of them at our detention center have never been to the Kentucky Horse Park. They've never pet a horse. We brought animals in from the Central Kentucky Wildlife. They've never seen a possum. I mean, never waded in a creek, never fished, never this. They play basketball. They ride a bike. They've done that, some of them. But one of the things we really see is they kind of missed out on a lot of childhood things. And so I always feel good when we can give them those things and they get to experience, hey, this is fun. This is another way to have fun, besides using alcohol and drugs and other things they might do. So I'm always glad. Sometimes the public think like, well, gee, they shouldn't go off and have a good time, but they've lost their freedom to move about and go places and have a girlfriend. Think of all those things they give up. So we're fine with still, making sure they have some positive things that they can do and have some. I always say every kid should have a little bit of joy every day. I kind of get on a soapbox here. It's kind of nice. All these years later, I'm still pretty passionate about it. So if you have anybody else that has a passion for the work, send them our way, or we're hiring. All right. Well, you all have a
Okay.
pleasant
Well,
evening. I certainly enjoyed it.
we really
And,
appreciate having you, Vicki, and I think we're lucky to have such a passionate advocate for what children need in the juvenile justice cabinet with you there. Thank you so much. I think this was very informative, and if I was a CASA volunteer and I wound up with a kid involved in the juvenile justice system, I think I'd feel a little more prepared to advocate for what they need now. So
Great. Good. Well, thank you for what you all do.